while the world and South Africa yesterday celebrated Nelson Mandela Day, an NGO working in rural communities, One Africa, has highlighted very shocking statistics that actually shows that more than 90,000 teenagers gave birth in the year 2024, that is last year. And of the 90,000, about 2,328 of them are girls aged from 10 years old to 14 years old, mostly in rural communities. And the organization is now calling on government as well as other civic society organizations to act on the promise for better life for all, and that these young girls actually deserve power, protection and possibility. Gqibelo Dandala is the Executive Director of One Africa, and she joins us now to further unpack this. Gqibelo, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to SA Today. So you've just heard in my intro those very shocking figures. In fact, you are privy to these shocking figures of teenage pregnancies and births. But let's first find out about the patterns that One Africa has actually observed in the recent data on teenage births, especially among those girls that are aged between 10 to 14. What are you identifying as the underlying drivers of this crisis, specifically within rural communities?
Well, good afternoon, Alicia. Thank you for having us. I think there are two direct drivers and one bigger driver, which is more societal. The direct drivers we are finding is that the first is it's an issue of lack of access to sexual reproductive health services. And this really is a problem because our constitution says that every person in South Africa must have access to a health facility within a 5-kilometer radius. That is not the case in the areas in which we are operating. And so that's the first and biggest problem, because even when they do access these sexual reproductive health services, they are met with condemnation, they are met with judgment, and that often forces many young people to just walk away. And yet it doesn't stop their behavior. It simply stops them accessing those services. Mm-hmm. The other problem that the other contributor is intergenerational relationships. Now, others would normally call this sugar daddies, but the difference in our areas is that these intergenerational relationships are driven by poverty. So it is not young looking for access. They are not looking for the latest iPhones or the latest gadgets or clothing. They are doing this as a means of survival to access some of the basic things that they need in order to continue and survive, particularly as young women. So these are the two key contributing factors. But I think another one that we don't often speak about, but which we should, is that there exists an enabling environment for such to happen. So let's remember that adolescent mothers are adolescents, and by virtue of that, they are children. So this is a problem and a reflection on our ability as a society to protect our children. And so we should be asking ourselves, what is it in our communities that enables this behavior to continue, certainly unabated? I mean, a child of between the age of 10 and 14, that is a crime in every sense of the word. It should not be happening. People should be held to account for a girl between the ages of 10 and 14 falling pregnant. But it's not happening. So there's something happening in our society and communities that we need to start to discuss and to address. Mm-hmm. And I know it's uncomfortable, but it's enough now. What needs to happen for us to start having these uncomfortable conversations?
You know, they are very uncomfortable conversations there, of course, Gqibelo, because I was just about to say to you, how does then your team work with these local caregivers as well as clinics in order to respond to these challenges? And I have to ask this, since these are underage pregnancies, as you've pointed out, the girls concerned here legally couldn't have given any consent. So do you also then involve or try to involve law enforcement authorities? Because when you bring this aspect up, you are often told that the families of the girls actually don't report these cases, or the perpetrators will pay off inhlawulo or damages to these families, and this then goes unreported, and it becomes a repetitive cycle, as you've just pointed out. It's basically parents, in a way, pimping out their children because of poverty.
Yes, it absolutely is. And we need to be able to stop stopping this at every possible level. first from a home level to say this should not be happening in a home. And we need to start making people accountable for allowing this to happen. And what's painful is that when we then take it to our constitutional court systems, exactly to your point, they say in Kabulo. And my question is, who does that benefit? Does that actually stop this happening again? And the reality is that it's not. The figures speak for themselves to say that it is not. And so we need to start even looking at our traditional systems and norms to say, do they continue to serve the purpose for which they were intended? They are supposed to protect the communities that these courts are serving. And we cannot say this was acceptable behavior 30 years ago, 50 years ago, and continue to say that it is. So we really need to look at both our traditional systems and our legal systems and ask the question, why is it not happening? Why do the police fall back and say, this is a family matter? How can it be a family matter when a 13-year-old is pregnant? That is not a family matter. That is bigger than the family. That is a sign to the failure of the family structure and system. And so these are things that need to be addressed. And I dare say, it makes me proud in moments like this to work at One-to-One because our programs recognize this. And so our programs don't just deal with direct beneficiaries, so be it young people or mothers and children. One of the things we've identified at One-to-One in working in communities is that we have to start supporting families and the journeys, these uncomfortable journeys that families have to undertake when speaking and having uncomfortable conversations. We have to hold their hand if we want them to start being held accountable.
Absolutely.
And so we do a lot of work on that to make sure that we support families and families that do want accountability but don't even know where to begin.
Gqibelo, unfortunately, we're out of time. I would have loved to continue with this discussion for the rest of this afternoon because it's such a key and very important topic, specifically when you go to those impoverished communities. That is Gqibelo Dandala there. She's the Executive Director of One-to-One Africa on their programs currently addressing the alarming underage pregnancies, specifically in rural areas as part of Nelson Mandela Day programs.